Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all back from your coffee break. And we are getting ready to begin our fourth session on the theme of heritage and cultural diversity in crisis. My name is Joseph King. I am a senior director at ICROM in Rome, and I would like to welcome you all back to this session. The theme of cultural heritage and diversity is recently being recognized as a more important part of taking care of things in times of crisis, and particularly in creating resilience before a crisis develops, in addition to also being an important part of our response to a crisis and in the recovery phase following a crisis situation. Crises affect not just the built heritage, but also objects and other types of movable heritage, intangible heritage, and also current cultural creativity. All of this has a negative impact on our cultural diversity and more generally on the well-being of people and of their communities. Because it affects the heritage across the board, there is a need for the heritage community to work together to develop appropriate integrated policies and solutions. It is for this reason that Mondiacult 2022 is such an important venue for developing these policies and developing these mechanisms. And it gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce our panel of ministers and others that will be speaking to you today. We will be hearing from 8 member states of UNESCO on how they are trying to work on these important issues and how they are developing policies and mechanisms to deal with the issues of heritage and cultural diversity in times of crisis. We will also be hearing from a number of observers. At the moment, I have 3 on my list. I would remind our member state speakers that you have 4 minutes for your interventions. And that for our observers coming afterwards, there will be 2 minutes for those. And I would ask very much that everyone try to keep to time in order to make sure that we can get this session in time. So without further delay, I would like to call on our first speaker, and that would be Her Excellency Ms. Elva Margheriti, Minister of Culture of Albania, to open this session and to give us her presentation. Thank you very much. Madam Minister, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues from all over the world, first of all, I would like to congratulate and be thankful for the organizers of Mondiacult 2022 who gathered us here in Mexico City, in this World Heritage City, to discuss about cultural policies, sustainable development, and to share our experiences. Albanians have always been people who cherish the harmony of various religions in the country and different cultures, between ancient Greeks and Romans, at the front line of Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Islam. Albanians have always witnessed some of the most dramatic developments throughout history, old and new. It's not a coincidence that in Albania you should find churches, mosques, synagogues alongside older monuments. And in this respect, we are not different from many other countries and cultures worldwide. Still, we bring our distinguished flavor, the unmistakable Albanian harmony between these cultures and religions and those people. We do not have numerous temples and monuments of stone or other building materials, but we have these monuments engraved in our psyche, in our history, in our culture, in our custom, in our tradition. And it has not been an easy period for Albania because since 2019 there were 2 devastating earthquakes that followed then after by the pandemic. Now, like the rest of the world, we are also sharing the same current energy crisis while hoping for an end to a war that threatens humanity very existence. One would think that a country with little economic room, like Albania, has not any possibilities for maneuver in this case. This means taking hard decisions that prioritize other sectors. And at the same time, it looks like culture becomes an unnecessary luxury, but it's not our case, because in Albania, especially after the earthquake, we are fully aware that the material well-being and cultural development go hand in hand. For it's in our human nature that even in the face of adversities, we exercise culture, even in the most basic level. I made this short introduction for you to place it in context of our steps, which are focusing on creating a new functional cultural policy in the country. And we have worked since 2018 with a new cultural heritage law for the protection of monuments and especially for the new management of those sites. While the law on cultural heritage and museums set forth a new landscape for the management of cultural heritage and sets, we also saw the necessity of a national strategy since 2019 regarding creative industries, culture in economic development, digitalization of our cultural expression, not just material but also intangible, and an inclusion of youth and civil society in those policies. We have heard a lot about the expression of cultural heritage as an important factor in sustainable development. However, I will be very cautious in placing culture in the economy service. I believe the opposite. Culture in all pervasiveness has always been an economic dimension. In Albania, we have initiatives aimed at rehabilitating, but also preserving and promoting cultural heritage. Since after the earthquake, we started making much more connection with the communities and the people. So in our latest initiative that is called Revitalization Grant, as part of the National Fund of the Ministry of Culture, we take care of our tangible cultural heritage together with the people, with the owners of houses of historical sites. So we contribute together to restore those houses, these places, and to bring them back to the communities and supporting especially the creative industries. But at the same time, as I mentioned you before, after the earthquake, Albanian government has successfully cooperated with the EU delegation, also with UNESCO, with World Bank and other development and cooperation agencies of various states. And together with the National Institute for Cultural Heritage, we were all together part of this cooperation and contributed to the cultural heritage post-disaster damage and needs assessments. And this brought us all together to the biggest support from the EU delegation, 40 million euros for the reconstruction of 35 sites, but also for the revitalization of those. We are going through a long process of digitalization of our museums, of new management plans of our castles that were damaged. And there is a big component of digitalization that means how to promote culture through digital, through audio guides, through virtual tours, and how to open a new sector of supporting youth and civil society in this reconstruction. At the same time, we are...
Thank you. Could I ask you to please wrap up? Thank you.
Just for closing, thank you. So we are working again with UNESCO on intangible heritage promotion, and since it hasn't been done for a long time, so our efforts can be successful without full engagements of the communities. This should be, I think, the remark, and we should be inclusive and will be a sincere cooperation between the government, the local municipalities and also the communities, because we should not forget that each culture is unique and the diversity is a strength and it is not a weakness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, and I apologize for the interruption. I'd like to now give the floor to our next speaker from Benin, His Excellency Monsieur Jean-Michel Abimombola, Minister of Tourism, Culture, and the Arts. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much to UNESCO. Dear colleagues, Before anything else, I'd like to salute the quality of the work and the engagement of our common institution in UNESCO, which, alongside nations such as Benin, works to make culture a lever for sustainable development. Benin has opted for the ambition of turning culture and tourism levers of economic development for increasing our wealth and employment and international development. But how can we reach that when certain cultural goods that are witnesses of what happened in our country are not accessible to our people? They are often considered simple curiosities or objects of art. The illicit trafficking of these goods are reducing the room for maneuvering of economic development, and it is there where we go through the preservation and conservation of cultural heritage that is affected by NAM. This policy is within the sphere of the international conventions such as 1970 and 2005 of UNESCO. In that logic, our countries enacted a new law on October 22nd, 2021, on the protection of cultural heritage in the Republic of Benin, which provided for several measures to face the new challenges while reinforcing the institutional framework for managing the museum sector, including the creation of the meeting of public museums. One of the major facts of this political will is the program of restitution and return to Benin of heritage works torn from our lands during the colonial wars. This historical action is in line with the provisions of the 1970 Convention, which calls on the state's parties to undertake and take appropriate measures for the seizure and return of all stolen cultural property. And it is part of our strategy and aligned with the conventions. As was summarized by the president of the country in his address to UNESCO on June 1st, 2018, when he declared the restitution, sharing, and circulation of cultural property is now for Benin a factor in the fight against poverty, a factor in the creation of jobs and wealth, a tool for socioeconomic development, everything that falls within the objectives of development and cooperation. By achieving this feat, the Beninese and French peoples wanted to inaugurate a new era, not only for the restitution of cultural property, but also for a positioning of cultural heritage as a cornerstone of the economy, a lever for the tourism industry. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to this restitution, which is no exaggeration to consider the most emblematic of this century, we have crossed the bar of passions and managed to obtain a convergence of political, historical, technical, and scientific sensitivities to assume a glorious and tormented past. It is the testimony of cooperation that aims to create a new relational ethic and a salutary perspective for the new world order. Indeed, the international community is questioning the secrecy of the success of this operation and its consequences. It was first necessary to count on a political will marked by an investment plan of nearly 2 billion euros devoted to investment in museum and heritage programs to reveal Benin's cultural exception to the world, establishment of appropriate equipment, training, and the transfer of skills, mobilization of international skills in favor of the professionalization of governance of museums and heritage institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, the experience of the restitution of cultural property in Benin is indicative of the useful work that humanity does every time we prevent generations from being deprived of their heritage. On this project, UNESCO is more than ever solicited and expected. I am already delighted with the institution's support for the establishment of the framework for reflection, exchange, and sharing that is Mondiacult. I would, in this regard, also like to thank the Mexican state for having hosted us and for all of the facilities that were placed at the disposal of all delegates. And once again, I would like to say that it is through these conferences that relocation and better circulation of the world's heritage will be undertaken for sustainable, equitable development. Long live cultural development, cultural protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And actually, I want to take the opportunity to thank Benin also on behalf of ICROM for our long-standing collaboration on conservation of cultural heritage in sub-Saharan Africa. So thank you, Mr. Minister. I would now like to move on to our next speaker, Her Excellency Madam Maria Elena Machuca, the Minister of Culture of Ecuador. Madam, you have the floor, and thank you.
Thank you very much, participants in this conference, the panelists. To talk about heritage as an axis for social and economic development in post-pandemic times is paramount and is precisely what we can do today in this context of Mondiacult, in this beautiful country. Culture and heritage have changed. They are living entities, and it's these changes that keep them active and energize them. But also, they affect them, and it's precisely the effects of human actions that have most impacted the sustainability of our heritage, both positively through projects, specific actions, and conservation and safeguarding policies of our heritage, as well as negatively through interference or in other words, poor interference or omissions that increase on a larger scale the impacts of climate change. There is no doubt that climate change should be one of our major concerns because of its impact on World Heritage sites, as is rightly pointed out in the World Heritage and Tourism Report. It is therefore necessary that we as governments to adopt strategies and measures, both regionally and nationally, so that we can efficiently address the threats that loom over the assets of our heritage, many of which are directly exposed to the effects of climate change. One example in our country is the Capacñan Andean road system, where in 2019, in a subsection located in southern Ecuador in the province of Loja, there was a forest fire that affected part of the road and some of the adjoining archaeological sites, threatening their continued existence and heritage value. In addition, there are droughts that, because of climate change, are longer and longer and seriously threaten the exceptional universal value of these World Heritage sites. Furthermore, cultural heritage is at high risk of suffering the onslaught of natural disasters. According to reports from the World Heritage Center, between 2000 and 2019, worldwide, there were 7,348 natural disasters affecting 95 million people, causing economic losses of over $100 million. We have to ask ourselves then, out of these numbers, how much of our cultural heritage was affected? In Ecuador, we've just reopened the Bahia Museum, which suffered an earthquake in 2016, and it's taken us 7 years to be able to make it again available to, or at the service of culture. This is why it's important to reflect on the development of public policies that will make possible the conservation, safeguarding, and valuing of cultural assets and heritage consistent with the territories, their natural surroundings, and above all, with the active participation of their communities. Because heritage is in the people. It is in the keepers of wisdom. Expressions such as the traditional weaving of the Ecuadorian toquilla straw hat, registered in the UNESCO Representative Intangible Cultural World Heritage List of 2012, and the oral heritage and cultural expressions of the Zapara people, a binational heritage of Ecuador and Peru, registered in 2008. These would not exist without the keepers of wisdom, without the cultural context, without their ecosystems, and without their territory. For instance, the Zapara people, who live in a region of the Amazon rainforest located between Peru and Ecuador, inhabit one of the world's most biodiverse regions. Their oral traditions are filled with knowledge about their natural environment, as evidenced by the richness of their terminology for the flora and fauna, their knowledge of the forest's medicinal plants, as well as how they talk about their myths, rituals, and artistic practices. The Zapara people, who by 2001 did not exceed 300 inhabitants, 200 in Peru and 100 in Ecuador, are one of the last representatives of an ethno-linguistic group that used to encompass many other populations before the Spanish conquest. Sadly, only 5 of these inhabitants, who are now over 80 years old, speak entirely in the Zapara language. Yes, I'm about to finish. Okay. This is why it's important to protect the heritage worldwide, and that's why we're here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you for bringing up the issue of climate change, because it is such an important issue for us. At this point, we're going to move to 2 interventions on video. So the first one is from Georgia. It is Her Excellency Ms. Thea Tsulukiani. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the Vice Minister of Culture, Sport, and Youth. And we will now see that presentation on the screen.
Honorable ministers and colleagues, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, I have a great pleasure to address you from Art Palace of Georgia, the most visited museum of our country. First of all, let me thank UNESCO for its tireless work throughout the world over the years to protect cultural heritage and to promote diversity. For us, this conference is very important in Georgia, since we have been readdressing pressing issues in the field and readopting new legislation in order to present before our parliament next year Georgia's new draft code of culture. The outcome of this conference and of course the UNESCO cultural conventions will serve as a guide in this work. The new Code of Culture of Georgia should help us to better protect the cultural heritage everywhere in our country, including on the territories occupied by the Russian Federation, to better manage our museums, for them to become better places for educational activities, to make culture accessible everywhere, especially in rural areas for more people, to prevent illegal archaeological work, to better regulate the relationship between the state and the church whilst protecting cultural heritage and many others. Let me express our full support to the points raised in the Mondiacult Declaration and thank UNESCO and the Mexican government for organizing this very important conference, which is all the more important given the geopolitical, economic, social, and environmental context in the world currently. I wish you success and fruitful work.
I'd like to thank, yes, please. I'd like to again thank the Vice Minister for that intervention. We can now move on to our next intervention, which is also on video from New Zealand. It is the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, Her Excellency Ms. Carmel Sepuloni.
Tēnā koutou katoa. It is a privilege to take this opportunity as Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage for Aotearoa, New Zealand, to speak on the theme Heritage and Cultural Diversity in Crisis, with a focus on Indigenous peoples. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the central place in our nation of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, principles of partnership, participation and protection. These underpin the relationship between the New Zealand government and Māori as Indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the role of Māori as knowledge holders, cultural owners and guardians. I would also like to acknowledge UNESCO for convening this important forum, which allows for continuous reflection on cultural policies and sustainable development. Aotearoa, New Zealand is a proud founding member of UNESCO, being the second country to sign the UNESCO Constitution in 1946. We continue to be committed to working with the United Nations, including doing our part to progress our sustainable development goals as set by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. For many countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and exacerbated pre-existing structural, systemic and funding inequalities for Indigenous peoples. Indigenous communities have been hit particularly hard, threatening the sustainability of Indigenous heritage, both tangible and intangible. I know that in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the pandemic impacted the transmission of mātauranga Māori, or traditional knowledge, systems and practices, accessibility to mātauranga and taonga cultural assets and national heritage collections, and participation in Māori cultural activities. In May 2020, the New Zealand government announced our Arts and Culture COVID recovery program, a landmark investment of $495 million over 4 years in New Zealand's cultural recovery. The program included a wide range of initiatives to support Māori communities to protect vulnerable areas of mātauranga Māori. As a government, we continue to have a strong focus on supporting Māori to achieve their cultural aspirations through authentic partnership. This can involve kaupapa Māori approaches, which use Māori ways of knowing, doing, and understanding, growing, strengthening, and shaping the Māori arts, culture and heritage landscape in Aotearoa. Alongside our COVID response, we have recently enacted some groundbreaking new legislation that contributes to promoting and preserving our cultural heritage. Te Kāhui o Matariki Public Holiday Act 2022. On the 24th of June of this year, Aotearoa, New Zealand celebrated its first public holiday that distinctively recognises and celebrates our Indigenous worldview, Te Ao Māori. Matariki is a cluster of stars that rise in June and July, heralding the start of a new year. Matariki is an extremely important celebration for Māori across New Zealand and includes remembering those who have passed on since the last rising of Matariki, celebrating the gathering together of family and friends, and looking forward to the promise of the new year. Other existing legislation which helps protect our cultural heritage includes the Protected Objects Act 1975, which protects taonga tūturu, objects connected to Te Ao Māori, and regulates the export, trade, sale and ownership of these important objects which represent Māori knowledge and cultural expression. Safeguarding our cultural heritage is also a focus for the New Zealand government through the teaching of our history in schools. Recently, we unveiled the new history curriculum, which would ensure every child learnt about topics of national importance, with every school expected to teach about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the ongoing development of our national identity through immigration and colonialism in the Pacific. This is an important step toward protecting and nurturing the cultural heritage and awareness of our country's history. As a Pacific nation, climate change is a rising concern for Aotearoa New Zealand and across the region. Climate change presents a serious threat to culture, cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and ways of life. The government has recognised these risks in Aotearoa New Zealand's first National Adaptation Plan, which sets out the foundational actions the government is making to recognise and respond to the risks of climate change. This includes supporting Māori communities to adapt and conserve taonga cultural assets, producing guidance for risk management for cultural heritage, assessing vulnerability of cultural assets to climate change, and research on how cultural heritage contributes to climate change adaptation. Aotearoa is a proud Pacific nation, so it is concerning when I talk to my colleagues across the Pacific and they make reference to the fact that there is a lack of infrastructure in their island nations to preserve and protect cultural heritage in the Pacific Islands. And this emphasised for me the important role of UNESCO in providing assistance for the design and development of policies and regulatory frameworks that perhaps can address these challenges. It's not only the infrastructure that is missing, but often is raised with me that there is a lack of technical capacity to be able to work in the arts, culture and heritage sector across the Pacific. These are some of the challenges that we need to continue to discuss and work together to find solutions on. To conclude, as we collectively look ahead to tackle the impacts of global challenges on cultural heritage across the world, I want to stress the importance of bringing Indigenous communities into government policy, design and decision-making processes. This enables us to have a different conversation, but more importantly, focuses on intergenerational, sustainable transformation that takes into account the well-being of our whānau, families and communities. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you very much to the Minister from New Zealand. We now move back to our live presentations. Before I give the floor to our next speaker, I would just like to remind everyone to please try to keep to time, as we are actually starting to run out of time. So I would ask everyone to please keep to your time limits. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is from the Philippines, and he is representing the Minister of Culture. His name is Michael Manalo, and he is the Commissioner for Cultural Heritage in the Ministry of Culture. Speaking on behalf of the Minister of Culture, His Excellency, Mr. René Escalante. I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, we'd like to congratulate Mexico for this wonderful hosting of Mondiacult 2022, where we're all having this important dialogue on cultural policy. For us, crisis takes on many forms, and the Philippines is in the Pacific Rim of fire, and natural calamities abound. And also, this is where many of the most violent typhoons are born, and they always pass through our archipelago. And through all this, we are indeed thankful to the UNESCO and the international community for extending assistance, especially in the technical aspect. The knowledge shared through trainings and workshops have strengthened our own capability in dealing with such situations where heritage is most vulnerable. We also hope that our own experiences can enrich international policy and frameworks on heritage and natural calamities through increased dialogue and knowledge sharing. In this respect, the Philippines is slowly moving towards the institutionalization of disaster risk reduction and management plans at the local and national levels. Heritage impact assessments, as well as conservation management plans, have been mandated by no less than our basic law for heritage and culture, which was enacted in 2010. The mainstreaming of these for properties ranging from World Heritage Sites and to those of local significance is underway. Ladies and gentlemen, the threats of climate change are palpable. It is affecting everyone and spares no one. But sometimes the answers lie in what is skin deep. As much of our precious heritage are products of cultures that have existed for hundreds or even thousands of years, the knowledge that these cultures have passed on may hold the key to the survival of this heritage. Schools of living traditions have been found in several places in the Philippines, and these have proven to play an important role in safeguarding of tangible and intangible heritage practices. These are informal community-managed learning centers where practitioners can transmit their community's knowledge and intangible cultural heritage skills and values to younger generations. In 2021, this was listed in the UNESCO Register of Good Safeguarding Practices, and we are very thankful for that. To be able to ensure the transmission of traditional knowledge, which hopefully will also lead to the survival of our indigenous communities, we have implemented mother tongue and indigenous peoples education programs, which have resulted to small victories in the revitalization of the indigenous language and culture. These are some of our programs and policies that help avert a looming crisis in cultural diversity as dominant cultures, both local and international, pose an ever-increasing threat. We must all do our part as governments and practitioners to make sure that our traditional communities are given the opportunity to keep their cultures alive and for our countries to learn from their sustainable practices. The Philippines successfully piloted the implementation of the UNESCO Culture 2030 indicators in the city of Baguio, which is part of UNESCO's Creative Cities Network. This project that measures the contribution of culture in the attainment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals is being targeted to be replicated in other cities in the country, as it also marked the enactment of the Creative Industries Development Act. Apart from these initiatives, we are also in the midst of carrying out the Cultural Recovery and Resiliency Plan from 2021 to 2028, which aims to get our country's cultural sector back on its feet and to have a fortified future coming out of the pandemic. We are also looking into ways of addressing the digital divide by providing building capacity through ICT infrastructure and cultural content development. In closing, let us all turn all of these threats and crises into opportunities for crafting a better future for culture. And as we go back to our respective places of origin, we keep alive the spirit of Mondiacult through the sound policies for culture that we will be crafting. Hasta pronto. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Manalo. I will now move to our next speaker, and I would like to introduce from the United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Mr. Samuel William Shelukindo, who is the Ambassador and Permanent Delegate to UNESCO. Karibu Mzee.
Asante. Honorable Ministers here present, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, on behalf of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, I would like to commend UNESCO and the government of Mexico for excellent organization of this important conference that will certainly strengthen our cooperation in the field of heritage and cultural diversity. Honorable Ministers, cultural diversity is very important for protecting cultural heritage and promoting social and economic development. It helps communities lift themselves out of poverty It is a undeniable fact that using unique history and culture of each community can provide durable solutions which will have positive impact to our societies. We can all agree that cultural diversity encourages creativity and fostering meaningful dialogue on global issues that impact all members of society, regardless of different tradition, history, and customs. Our ministers, the Honorable of Tanzania has more than 120 ethnic communities, each of them with the elements of cultural heritage, including beliefs, values, tradition, languages, arts, sociocultural practice, rituals, behavior, knowledge, as well as craftsmanship. However, now heritage is at risk due to conflicts, poverty, technology development initiative, looting or illicit trafficking of cultural property in many places around the world. In the last few decades, we have witnessed new types of threat to cultural heritage as a result of easy movement of cultural goods and services across national borders and through online markets. The outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted many social cultural events and consequently engendered poverty. Distinguished participants, in order to address these challenges, we should foster on building accessible public access and civic institutions, safeguarding all forms of cultural heritage, protect and support cultural professionals, promote diversity, creativity, innovation, and integrate the arts and cultural sector in our recovery and development plans. And this can be achieved by developing better cultural policies to address all these aspects. In this regard, we encourage dialogue amongst ministers of culture on the evolving trend of cultural sector, its challenges and opportunities. At the national level, Tanzania has been supporting the mitigation measures towards heritage and cultural diversity. These include respecting cultural plurality, maintaining the universality of our common goals toward preservation, protecting cultural heritage sites and properties from destruction, poverty alleviation through job creation, building peace, solidarity, and cooperation among world communities, and promoting equality and freedom of expression. Tanzania Cultural Policy of 1997 for Tanzania mainland, which is currently under review, and the Zanzibar Cultural Policy of 2005 are the guiding tools in the implementation of cultural activities in the countries. In conclusion, it's worth noting that embracing cultural diversity is an opportunity in alleviating poverty, empowering communities, and promoting peace. The Honorable of Tanzania, therefore, is convinced that the outcome of this Mondiacult conference will be a milestone in efforts to develop better cultural policy. We do appreciate that prior to this conference, there have been extensive regional consultation that have yielded context-based recommendation on the promotion of cultural policies. In this regard, the Honorable of Tanzania would like to welcome and endorse the Mondiacult declaration that will be adopted at the final day of this conference. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that stimulating presentation. We now move to the last presentation from this first block, coming from Yemen, and I would like to introduce His Excellency Mr. Muammar Al-Eryani, Minister of Information, Culture and Tourism in Yemen. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
شكرا كثيرا. أصحاب المعالي.
Thank you very much, Excellencies,
السيدات والسادة.
Ladies and gentlemen present with us.
يشرفني أن أعبر عن خالص تقديري نيابة عن حكومة الجمهورية اليمنية.
I would like to express my gratitude. I'm honored to express my sincere appreciation on behalf of the government of the Republic of Yemen to the government of the United States, of the United Mexican States for hosting the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, Mondiacult in 2022. In 75 years of preserving the cultural and historical heritage of all countries of the world. And we celebrate the many achievements that have been made, conventions and treaties that have created a spirit of cooperation between our countries to preserve the common heritage, human heritage. Historic buildings and cities and heritage cities were restored and maintained. Rare and precious manuscripts, heritage, material, and non-material heritage have been documented. Noting that one of the themes of this global conference is about heritage and cultural diversity in crisis. Allow me to brief you on the crisis of the cultural heritage in Yemen during the ongoing war waged by the sectarian terrorist Houthis militia since its coup against the elected government in September 2014. Yemen has a rich cultural, diversified material and non-material heritage, which resulted from several civilizations that have existed and flourished in Yemen, as evident in the historical cities recognized by UNESCO's list of human heritage, such as Sana'a, Shiban, Hadramaut, Zabid, and Socotra archipelago. Several archaeological sites, buildings, historical palaces, historical places, and places of worship, hundreds of forts, and historical castles, not to mention the diverse and rich non-material heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, for nearly 8 years, Yemen is suffering the reproduction of a coup against the state by the terrorist Houthi militia affiliated with Iran following its invasion of the capital, Sana'a, and many Yemeni governorates, causing a wave of forced displacement and refugees, the largest in the history of Yemen. Intellectuals, poets, writers, and artists were among the most affected victims of the repression and abuse that followed. The cultural and civilizational heritage in Yemen was devastated by the Iranian-backed Houthi coup due to its fragility and inability to confront the plans for the systematic destruction carried out by the Houthis militias, whose leaders described the civilization of Yemenis before Islam as infidelity that should not be proud of, in an implicit call to target it and destroy it. Since the coup, the Houthi militia has systematically used archaeological sites and historical buildings as military sites, illegal detention facilities for politicians, journalists, and civilians at large, and weapons depot. Some sites were deliberately and directly targeted by Houthis militia who looted and traded in Yemeni antiquities. The old city of Sana'a, which was recognized by UNESCO on the World Heritage List, was subjected to distortion by the Houthi militia through the printing of sectarian slogans and drawing pictures of its leaders and elements of on the wall of historical places, and demolition of the historic An-Nahrain Mosque, and the suspension of maintenance and renovation work for the city. In addition to the campaign of repression and abuse that male and female artists, intellectuals, poets, and writers are subjected to, and the hands of the Houthi, banning singing and raiding concerts and cultural and artistic events in areas of control. We remember here the young artist, actress, and model Intisar Al-Hamadi, who was abducted and forcibly disappeared since February 2021 on trumped-up charges. And she tried to commit suicide several times due to psychological and physical torture she was subjected to, and the poor conditions of detentions, which led to displacement and departure of many artists, poets, and intellectuals from its areas of control. The Iranian-backed Houthi militia is also attempting to dismantle the social fabric and harm civil peace after Yemenis, with their various social components, have lived for thousands of years without any discrimination between sects and religious, and carried out campaigns to restrict and target religious minorities, including the Baha. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of the Republic of Yemen, represented by the Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism, has exerted tremendous efforts to neutralize and spare the cultural heritage from direct targeting, which is limited with its limited resources. The ministry also strives to address the problems and challenges created by the war and impacted the cultural heritage in Yemen. Within its context, the ministry managed to return hundreds of artifacts, manuscripts, and collectibles belonging to the National Museum that were lost due to the current war, which was owned by the Thais Museum. And it was counted and compared with the existing.
To please conclude. Thank you.
1 minute, please. One minute.
Also in cooperation with UNESCO and with the support of the European Union, many historical buildings have been restored and maintained in Sana'a, Sibam, Hadramaut, Zabid, and Aden, which were damaged by torrential rain in Yemen. Despite the several challenges facing the cultural heritage in Yemen, including illegal trafficking, looting, cross-border, and despite the limited financial resources, and most importantly, the lack of insufficient professional of qualified staff in this profession, Nevertheless, we are confident that we can turn these challenges, into opportunities. We can turn these challenges into opportunities for action and success for what we aspire to achieve for our heritage and our national cultural identity. I came to you after more than 30 years of travel to give you the salutations of the people of Yemen. And through this conference, I would like to call upon you, all of you, and all the organizations, the national organizations and international organizations. I would like to call upon you to face and to talk about the militias, the Houthi militias, and all the demolition carried out by the Houthi militias against our cultural heritage, so that we can stop these criminal activities against against poets and against artists, and to release Intisar al-Hamadi. And I thank you very much, and I hope peace and prosperity for the entire world.
Okay, thank you all very much. That was actually a very stimulating round of presentations from all of you, so I would like to thank all of the speakers that we've had representing the member states of UNESCO. I now am going to turn to the observers, and to those observers I'm going to apologize because of my bad time management. We really do not have very much time, so I'm going to really ask you to limit yourself to the 2 minutes that you have available. So I'm going to go to the first observer on my list, and that is Daniel Ondo, President of the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa. Is he present? And if so, I'm asking, the observers will come and speak from the microphones here to the right. But we're really going to keep it to 2 minutes, and I apologize for that, but it's my fault. But
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, in CEMAC, we are honored to have been invited to this great gathering of culture. Our thanks to UNESCO and to our host country. In addition, to natural wealth in our region, we have heritage wealth and cultural wealth. Indeed, cultural heritage in our region has suffered extreme losses. We've had looting, and we've seen certain Western museums and private collections enjoying the benefits of our region. Central Africa has done what it can for the restitution of its cultural heritage, because a people without history is a people without a heading. UNESCO has helped our countries to accomplish this. Central Africa, like all countries throughout the world, has experienced the health crisis of COVID-19, and like other countries throughout the world, we've had to face this. UNESCO has helped us to become more resilient and to be able to face some of these crises. Why not have a fund devoted to culture throughout the world, so that cultural industries can flourish in all of their dimensions. The use of technological tools can also become a means of cultural promotion in Africa and other areas. Digitalization in our world could truly benefit us, and we would like to take this opportunity to thank the entire world for its support in these efforts. What has to do with security, we've seen a destruction of heritage, cultural heritage in areas of conflict, and UNESCO has tried to help in the preservation of these areas. UNESCO ties in the protection of the environment. Perhaps it can do this work to culture. Central Africa is the lungs of the entire world. So why can't we find a budget for this area of the world that is devoted to the health of the world? The economic crisis in Central Africa has led to terrible effects in our budgets, our countries that are poor, and it has affected our public policies. UNESCO has helped us in the valuation of our cultural heritage so that we can try at least to continue to preserve it despite these budgetary constraints. Thank you very much to UNESCO and Mexico for this wonderful organization of this wonderful conference.
Thank you very much. Our next observer is Mr. Roberto Suarez, Executive Secretary of the Central American Educational and Cultural Coordination. Please keep to your 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much to UNESCO for having invited us to this important event, to the to the government and Ministry of Culture of Mexico. I'm here in representation of the Central American Educational and Cultural Coordination, which is part of the Central American Integration System, represented by Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, and the Dominican Republic. From our coordination, we share with you that we are implementing the cultural policy for the integration in Central America, which has been specified in a roadmap through culture as a lever of integration that we are formulating with the support of UNESCO's support for Central America. This strategy has 6 aspects linked to common cultural heritage, interculturality, the economy, the citizen engagement, and strengthening of institutions. This strategy has led us to think about the agenda of our countries, the urgent addressing of the production and promotion of cultural diversity and heritage. This is why in specific actions we are carrying out the following. Number 1, under the 10 years of Afro-descendants in Central America, which has to do with the safeguarding of intangible assets in Latin America. We're talking with ONECA, the Central American Black Organization, and UNESCO to formulate projects for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage of Afro-descendants, also including Cuba in our region, with the aim of making an inventory, the manifestations of these peoples, to come up with safeguarding plans that will translate into social development and also environmental and economic development. It should be noted that the region's countries have made efforts or have joined in efforts to work in the formulation of these projects, and also within the framework of the International 10 Years of Indigenous Languages. We have been drafting the first regional plan for at a global level, protect what are indigenous languages. We are also working with Interpol to the preservation of the cultural heritage, underwater cultural heritage of the region by drafting a georeferential map, which are the sites of our sites that are in danger of disaster. And we also have a management policy of disaster management. Although it's true that the challenges are great, nonetheless, we are working together, and we are proposing to this great ministerial forum the creation of initiatives, joint initiatives, both sub-regional as well as regional, so that we can face up to all of these challenges together. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation.
We have two more observers who wish to take the floor on my list. I'll ask first Mr. Murad Mahmoudi, the Director of Culture of Alexo, to take the floor if he's in the room. Thank you. And again, I would ask you to please keep to the 2 minutes. Thank you.
صباح الخير. يسعدني باسم معالي المدير العام للأليكسو الأستاذ الدكتور محمد ولد أعمر أن أتوجه إليكم بالتحية. وفي بداية هذه الكلمة أتوجه أيضا بجزيل الشكر وعظيم الامتنان إلى منظمة اليونسكو على العمل المهني الدؤوب الذي تقوده من أجل تطوير السياسات الثقافية العالمية وربطها بالانشغالات المصيرية للإنسانية وخاصة قضايا السلم والأمن.
Especially the development. I would like to extend my thanks to the ministers of culture inside the Arabic group for their efforts, which has added a quality addition regarding the subject discussed all over the world about renewing the cultural policies in order to cope with the new strategies. In this respect, we'd like to point out the role of Prince Badr Abdullah bin Salman, the Minister of Culture in Saudi Arabia, for his great discussions in preparation for this conference, showing the results of what we do in the Arab countries and how we contribute to the human civilization through building the safe and balanced thinking and in achieving development as reflected in the documents which will be issued by this conference. Our organization at the regional level, it will continue its effort in order to contribute to the creation of arts and helping the thinkers and to protect tangible and intangible heritage. Our organization will support the countries in setting up their national cultural policies in accordance with international conventions and to achieve in order to have a culture based on balance. And thank you very much. And thanks for Mexico, and thanks for international organization. Thanks for UNESCO. Thanks for the people of the world. Thanks for our leaders and governments. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And now
شكرا على هذه المداخلة.
our final intervention to conclude.
المداخلة الأخيرة السيدة باتيا توريس من المجلس الوطني للرقص، وأنا بانتظار هذه المداخلة.
In the Assembly of UNESCO here in Mexico. And I want you to know
وأريدكم أن تعرفوا أن وأنا اكتشفت مدى أهمية أن نتشاطر معكم رقصنا
our ancient codexes, paintings. So I have devoted 30 years of my life for researching the effects of the pre-Columbian dances in the brain enhancement of my students. Luckily, the University of Colima, the University of Guadalajara and Yucatan, and many other universities all over the world have sponsored many scientific research to demonstrate the wisdom of these ancient rhythms to develop multiple intelligence in all participants in all ages. The CID will celebrate the 50 years. Next year, it was founded in 1973, and we invite all of you to join and celebrate with us these efforts that 170 countries do to preserve their cultural heritage and transmit it to future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that inspiring presentation for us. I'm going to conclude, but before I do, I understand that there is a request for a right of reply from the floor, from the Russian Federation. I will remind the speaker that they have 1 minute to make that reply, and that it will be made from the floor, if I understood correctly. Okay, and please, one minute, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I would like to make an introduction on behalf of the official delegation of the Russian Federation. I'll do it in English in order to make it more understandable to Slovakia and all the countries trying to politicize this session with these declarations. The culture of the ethical Russian who are Ukrainian citizens and live in the territory for centuries is in danger. The regime in Kiev made every effort to destroy all the monuments of the Russian culture, Soviet Union heritage, prohibited the Russian language, and persecute the Russian-speaking people, depriving them from their basic right to participate in cultural life of the country. 8 years since 2014, Russia saw different platforms was trying to negotiate and find a peaceful solution while the Ukrainian government was destroying the historic buildings, monuments in Donbas region, destroying cultural monuments and trying to annihilate the Russian-speaking people and their culture. The Ukrainian government signed the Minsk agreements that included the ceasefire. Russia agreed to be a part of this process, trying to save people in Donbas. Our European partners were in direct contact and were guaranteeing the implementation of these accords. But the Ukrainian government were violating them, destroying the Donbas. So now I'd like to ask of all the countries that have just hypocritically accused Russia, where have you been these 8 years? Just a moment.
Your time is up, please, so please conclude.
And personally, I'd like to stress that my grandfather was a Russian-speaking citizen in Donbas and was born and lived in Ukraine. Every Russian family has relatives in Ukraine, making it a tragedy for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank all of our speakers today. I think this has actually been a really excellent session. I'm going to apologize again for the time management, and that's on me, so I really do apologize for that. And what I had was a little bit of a longer summary, but I'm going to cut all of that out, and I'm just going to say that I want to thank you all for talking about all of the new issues, the new laws and policies that you've been bringing out now on restitution, on illicit traffic, on management of the heritage, on HIA. I was very happy from the Philippines to hear about HIA, and on climate change. Those are really some of the important issues that we're dealing with. But what I want to do is I want to conclude actually by repeating the words of the Minister of Culture of Ecuador. And I want to just remind everybody that our heritage is in our people. The heritage is in the people. And that's what we need to remember, and that's what we need to take away from this. So I'm going to thank you all, and I'm going to hope that you walk away from this session with a lot of new information, and I'm going to close, because if not, UNESCO is going to probably kill me, and I don't want them to do that. So thank you all very much.